forefathers came west over the Adirondacks, they found a forested land ripe for the plow, a fertile land which required little more than clearing to burst forth with crops. Most of this farmland is gone now, as are those early pioneers, but their heritage remains with us. In Shaker Heights, we are fortunate to share in the history of the Shakers, the religious group which lived in this area for much of the last century. But who were they, these Shakers? What can we learn from them? The best place to start is at the Shaker Museum on South Park. We visited there recently with a fourth grade class from University School.
And then if they wanted to sort out just the beans that were the smallest, they would work the winnow sort of in this fashion. And some of you down below there can pick up the small beans. And what are the rest of you going to see left up top in the winnow?
The big bean.
The big one. So we'll let these people here in front pick up the small ones, and then you see that the larger ones didn't go through the slats.
But if you didn't get any from.
And so they could sort out their beans, or they used it also for grain, so that the straw would stay up on top and the wheat heads or corn would stay down or would fall down below. So winnow and scythe are two words that may be new to you this morning, that are implements when it comes to thinking about pioneer and Shaker folk at this time of year. Now, have any of you ever tasted dried corn?
Yeah.
I don't mean corn on the cob in August when it's nice and fresh, but after it's been cut off the cob and dried, and then in the winter your mother may soak it?
No.
I don't think so. Do you think you really have?
No. But I have a question.
Oh, well, would you let me finish about the dried corn? Because dried corn is a favorite of mine, and it was a favorite of the Shakers too and other pioneer people. But the dried corn that I was referring to from the sisters' industry was where they would take yellow corn, just like you would eat fresh, boys, and they would husk it and then boil it for about 2 minutes, and then take a knife and cut the corn right off the cob. Then that cut corn was what was spread out and dried. They'd have drying racks, sometimes made out of just cheesecloth, and they would take 2 or 3 days to dry the corn completely, so it was just as dry as those beans are.
Although the Shakers may sound like many others from the 19th century, they were an innovative and progressive people, not afraid of new technology. Among other things, they invented the modern flat broom and the circular saw. They were the first to package seeds for sale. They used scientific farming methods. How were they able to do this? Richard Klyver, a member of the Shaker Heights Historical Society, has studied the Shakers.
Well, there were other communal societies back in the 19th century. The Shakers lasted longer and were more successful than any of them. And perhaps one of the reasons was the fact that many very prominent and well-educated people joined the Shaker movement. This was not a movement that was made up entirely of poor people, although, of course, there were many in the group. But there were a lot of engineers and architects and doctors and ministers and other well-educated people who joined. And I think that that is perhaps one reason why they were so successful. I think another reason is perhaps the fact that after the death of Ann Lee in 1884, she was succeeded by Joseph Meacham, and he was a genius at organizing, and he was the one who was able to organize these colonies in such a way that it would guarantee a long life. Their communal living, of course, was part of their religion. I think I hesitate to use the word communism because that conjures up all kinds of things that we associate with Russia. But actually it was a form of pure communism as far as their economic life was concerned. And it shows perhaps that communism could work and could only work provided everybody would look upon their material possessions in the way the Shakers did. Selfishness did not enter into the picture at all. If this society of ours were made up of people who were entirely unselfish, why, it's possible that communism would work. But of course that is not being at all realistic.
How did
Yes.
they handle, I can understand communal owning or common ownership of tools, and houses and horses and carriages and so forth. How do they handle their clothes, personal artifacts, things like that?
Well, their personal items they did not own in common. No, this is true. Well, I guess that answers that question. Right.
What happened to the North Union Shakers? They had an interesting, thriving colony there, and things began to go downhill about
Yes.
1850? Or?
Well, perhaps slightly later than that. With the Civil War, it was recognized that the Shakers, not only of North Union, but of all the colonies throughout the country, were on the decline. There are several reasons for that. The first one that comes to mind, of course, is obviously celibacy, but by no means was that the only reason, or perhaps not even the chief reason. After the Civil War, people were less interested in religions than they were prior to the Civil War. The great religious revivals were a phenomenon of the period from 1830 to 1850. That was now over. People's attentions now were drawn towards such things as the settlement of the West, and the building up of railroads, and the making of money, and having big corporations and so forth. A second reason is the fact that the Shakers found it increasingly difficult to compete economically with the factory system, particularly communities like North Union. Its close proximity to the big city of Shaker Heights, to the city of Cleveland, meant that they could not compete with the factories of such big cities. And so gradually, they found that there was no market for the goods which they handicrafted by hand. And then a third reason lies in the fact that our country was being settled, big cities were springing up, means of transportation, particularly the railroads, were coming into being, so that people no longer felt as isolated as they had once upon a time felt. That desire to get together in a group for both physical and social security, the desire for comradeship, which led many people to join the Shakers in pre-Civil War days, that no longer existed. So these things and others, I think, help to account for the gradual decline of the Shaker movement.
From about 1830.
Dan Blackhurst is a Shaker resident who was inspired by the Shakers. His hobby now is crafting authentic reproductions of Shaker furniture. He showed us his son's room, filled entirely with his creations.
Yes, this particular chair was copied from a chair from the Mount Lebanon community. It's a typical Shaker chair from just before the time period in which they began making and selling chairs commercially. It's mixed woods, as the Shakers often did. In this one, the vertical leg pieces are cherry, the arms are cherry, the stretchers are ash, and the bent back pieces are ash. There's a rush seat. They used rush and splint, and in the later years they went to woven cloth tapes. Lines are very simple. It has the mushroom caps on the arms and a fairly simple design at the top of the back posts. Typical with the Shaker construction, each of the stretcher pieces are pinned where they enter the legs. The arm enters here, and the front leg just comes up through the arm and is covered with a cap. The only decorative marks you might see are these small score lines down as we go down the back posts, but those were merely put on while the piece was in the lathe to mark the location for the back, so that you would know where to cut into this leg to fit the back. Well, from my standpoint, chairs are the most difficult to make because there's so many pieces, and they have to be fitted extremely well, or you end up with a chair that's crooked and twisted. And also, a chair takes a tremendous amount of abuse, a lot of weight and rocking, and a rocking chair in particular, so that construction of chairs is probably the most difficult. I go to the museums quite often and measure from existing museum pieces. And currently, there are several books that have recently been published giving full-scale plans, measured drawings, so that there's been an increased interest in the last 5 years in shaker design and furniture.
When you started doing this, there weren't any books out.
No, no books at all. There were a few books with pictures, but you have to get to the actual piece and measure it before you can actually build it. This particular shelf was called a utility shelf. It was used in all different rooms of the shaker buildings, from the kitchens through the bedrooms. It's just a very simple 3-shelf design. It has a heavy cord or leather thongs which support it from the pegs. And you can just pick it up and move it wherever you'd like. This is a shaker low-back dining chair. It was made in a very low seat and back, so that when the meal was over, the chair was actually slid under the table out of the way. This particular one I've made is done in tiger stripe or curly maple. It has the shaker woven tape seat, which was used widely in the later years of the shakers. They made them in both a single back and double back style. This is, of course, the double. It's got the usual pinned joints and the padded, quite comfortable seat.
And you turned all this yourself?
Yes.
Where do you find the wood?
Oh, I just visit some of the local lumber mills and sawmills out in Geauga County and surrounding areas. And certain of the people will call me when they have a particular nice piece of wood that I've told them I'd like to get. I have several planks of that curly maple which I hoard and use one small piece at a time when it's something I want to make. This desk is a reproduction of a shaker kitchen table. The original is on display at the Shaker Museum in New York. It was used as a slicing table for the vast quantities of bread that had to be sliced for the comparatively large community it was used at. The original is made in maple. I made this particular one in cherry because we were going to use it as a desk, and I happened to have some nice cherry that I liked very well. It has a single drawer, which is dovetailed. It has the typical shaker leg style, which is just a simple taper. There's no ornamentation. It has a rim that extends completely around the top. The purpose of that rim was just to keep the breadcrumbs from falling on the floor while they were slicing bread. It causes some problems when used as a desk in a boys' room because it's very difficult to dust because you're dusting inside a closed area.
The Shakers believed in complete simplicity, no ornamentation, and anyone looking at Shaker furniture very quickly recognizes this. It's beautiful furniture, but its beauty consists of its form rather than any ornamentation upon it. They believed in functionalism. Everything that they did, they believed should actually be practical. Take, for example, a Shaker chair. And this chair I'm sitting in, incidentally, is not a Shaker chair. This is a rather massive thing that I'm sitting in. But Shaker chairs are very light, so they can be easily handled. They could be easily picked up and placed upon a peg rail. The Shakers, like the Danish cabinet makers, have made their chairs very, very strong.
This is a Shaker wall cabinet that's copied from a cabinet at the Pleasant Hill community in Kentucky. It was used in the schoolroom for housing school supplies. It's one of the few Shaker pieces with a lock on it. I assume that was to keep the students out of the supplies. This one is in walnut. It's designed again to hang from the pegs and can be moved around the room.
How did this, what do you call this rail around?
I call it a peg rail, or just a hanging rail, but typically they refer to it as a peg rail.
Was this something unique to the Shakers, or was it fairly
As far as I know, it was the extent to which it was used was unique to the Shakers. They would use it in every room. They would even have double rows of the pegs, and even under the windows at times. They used it very extensively. Workshops, kitchens, bedrooms, living rooms, dining rooms. The dining rooms, they had it to hang the dining chairs on while they were cleaning the floor. So it was widely used.
It's good for football helmets, too.
Yes. It's great for a kid's room. It gives them some place to hang everything up. Oh, this table was copied from a Shaker washstand, which was used in the laundry just to support laundry tubs. The wood in this one is cherry and ash. The stretchers are ash. The legs are cherry, but they've been stained a dark brown color, which is not characteristic of cherry. This is a typical Shaker dresser. Here again, I used butternut as the wood. It has 2 independent drawers at the top, 3 varying size drawers on the bottom section. The rests on a base. It's interesting in that the base is dovetailed and pinned. Here again, there's very little decoration on it. A simple cove molded edge on the base. This was preceded by the chest on chest, which they would have a single open top and 2 drawers, but the top would just be a chest cavity. This is a Shaker bench. It's referred to as the Canterbury bench. It's considered kind of a classic of Shaker design. Oh, certainly. This particular one is made from a mixture of woods, as the Shakers often did. The top of the back happens to be a piece of curly basswood. The seat is basswood, which was referred to as one of the white woods they used in their furniture construction. The back spindles are simple tapered spindles of maple, and the legs and the stretchers are curly maple. It has a dark stain and a lacquer finish on this particular piece. While it's considered one of the Shaker classics, it has a serious structural flaw in that the legs have no support in the horizontal direction, so that it does suffer from that flaw. But it very simple design again.
Miss Atkinson, tell me about this museum. Who comes here and why?
Well, the museum is maintained by the Shaker Historical Society, and we really have a three-pronged thrust. The educational component of the museum is, of course, a very important one, and all the 3rd grade children from the Shaker Heights School District come to the museum in the course of their study of local history.
How many people come during the course of a week?
Well, that varies depending on whether it's August, when lots of people have out-of-town guests to bring to the museum, or a month like now when we are beginning to have groups of school children come. But the museum is open during public hours to anyone who wishes to avail themselves of what we have here.
Had you had a great interest, a particular interest in the Shakers previously, or is this something new?
Well, it's relatively new, although being a resident of the Cleveland area most of my life, I've been brought up with at least a basic knowledge of the Shaker community. But I find it fascinating to expand that amount of knowledge.
What's the most impressive thing that you've found about the Shakers?
Well, I think that respecting their attitudes toward their environment and the gifts of that environment and their use of it in terms of their care and preciseness, the quality of workmanship that they produced, and their general lifestyle, which was definitely an outgrowth of their religious beliefs.
Tell me a bit about their lifestyle as it related to their environment.
Well, Mother Ann had a slogan that there was no dirt in heaven and there would be no dirt in her Shaker communities. And so they their lifestyle reflected the methodical, neat, orderly fashion of their beliefs. Everything, a place for everything and everything in its place. Cleanliness is next to godliness. Hearts to God and hands to work, I think are all tenets that we can adapt today in our respect for and concern for our environment.
All right, now the last time you were here at the museum, you drew pictures of anything that you found that was interesting. Okay, today I would really like you to try and find something that has to do with harvest and draw a picture of that first, and then if there's something else in the museum that you're interested in, you can draw a picture of that afterwards. All right? Now, if you will just not crowd around here, you each will get a board and a pencil and a piece of paper. And then you can move off into the other room, Mark, to do your drawings.
Don't push me like
There you go. There you go. Okay. If you want more paper, there's plenty more paper here. Chris, would you hand pencils out to people?
draw this. I'll just like
They've learned a lot about the Shaker community here, where the buildings used to be, what kind of lives the people lived, both from visiting the museum and the community, walking around Horseshoe Lake, and from research that we've done on the Shaker people who lived here.
They seem to be really absorbing a lot of details about the Shaker lives. Do you think that's true?
Yes, I do, and it's great to see them in a setting like this because I find out how much they have picked up, which is exciting for me.
How have you reacted to what you've learned about the Shakers through this experience?
I find them a fascinating group of people, and the more I study them with my kids, the more excited I am about the fact that I live in a place where they used to be.
What's the most salient point that you've learned about the Shakers?
I think the fact that they used everything in the environment here in order to maintain their community, and they really wasted nothing. They made use of every bit of what they had here.
Is that the lesson that you think we can learn from them?
I think so, yes. That's what I'm hoping the boys will pick up from it.
I'm drawing the butter churner that the Shakers used when they were making cream, large cream and butter. And the pioneers had smaller ones, that as large as this one. I haven't seen one like this, that's why I'm interested in drawing this one.
I'm drawing the same thing as he is, and I didn't really think that a butter churn would be so big.
How does that work? Butter churn, how does it work?
Well, you clog up a hole somewhere, and you put cream into it, and then you turn the handle that is on it, and then when you think or it is ready, you take off the clog, and cream pours out, and what's left in there is the butter.
Yes, they were very healthy people, and if they were sick, they would sleep, and very healthy people.
Do you think it would have been fun to have been a Shaker boy?
general.
What would you like best about it?
I don't know.
What would you like least about it?
Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
The most impressive thing I've learned about the Shakers is that the men and the women don't touch each other and they go up different stairways and stuff like that.
Do you think that it would have been fun to be a Shaker?
Yes. Part of the time, like from the afternoon on to night, I would think it would be okay to be a Shaker, but when we get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day, that would sort of be out of the question.
Do you think it would have been fun to be a Shaker?
Yes,
Why?
because they have a lot of fun and you get a lot of work done and you make all kinds of inventions.
Would you mind getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning?
No,
You wouldn't mind?
no.
This is a cabbage slicer to make coleslaw. The Shakers invented it.
They invented coleslaw or the cabbage slicer?
The cabbage slicer.
Circular saws, flat brooms, packaged seeds, patent medicines, dried corn, coleslaw, clothespins, and possibly cabbage slicers. Our Shaker heritage has a lot to give us. Perhaps the greatest lesson is learning to live in tune with our environment. Thanks for watching Shaker Life. I'm Douglas Drake.